Dead horses. We all have to beat 'em. And what better dead horse is there than the sequel trilogy? The Force Awakens is turning 10 years old this December, and I thought I'd take a bit to talk about the sequels in general, and my ideas for how I would have done them differently. So to start, I grew up with the prequels, then the originals. Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie I watched in the cinema at 15. I enjoyed it, until like a few days later when I thought about it and realized the story somehow managed to simultaneously rip off A New Hope and still make no sense. Then Rogue One came out, which was fun, and he gave birth to Andor years later, which is the best thing Disney Star Wars has ever made, hands down. Then we get to The Last Jedi, and I was done with Star Wars movies. Didn't watch Solo or Rise of Skywalker, and I only know what happened in them because of the internet. Then we get the shows. I watched Rebels and the last season of Clone Wars. I enjoyed them overall, even though Star Wars Rebels was inferior to the original Clone Wars, but it was still good, especially towards the end. And the last season of Clone Wars, it wasn't as good as the original last seasons of the original Clone Wars, but it's still really good. Then the live action stuff. There's the aforementioned Andor, which is fantastic. Go watch it if you haven't. It's highly regarded by literally everyone. It's great. And we get to Mando. I watched the first season and liked it for what it was. It was a simple Monster of the Week type thing where guy goes around, fights bad guys. It was fun. But then season 2 came along, and I was duped by member berries. Oh my god, Ahsoka. Oh my god, Bo-Katan. Oh my god, Boba Fett. Oh my god, all this shit. And I didn't watch any other shows after that, beyond Andor and what Eve made reactions to. I watched them through reactions like The Acolyte and Book of Boba Fett, all that other shit. So, to quote Harrison Ford,
I don't care.
although the new stuff being shit did get me into the old books and comics, which are really good. Though I've only listened to the Darth Bane trilogy, the Darth Plagueis novel, and read Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina, plus a couple comics. I should really get back into them because it's really cool. I read the wiki a ton and watched a load of lore videos, so I'm at least somewhat knowledgeable in the old expanded universe. Like all the post-war stuff with the Fell Empire, that stuff's really cool. It's just awesome. And I've been thinking for a while, after reading all this stuff, how I would have done the sequels. And everyone and their grandma has criticized the plot and characters, but the world building isn't mentioned as much. It's still mentioned, just not as much as the other two are. And I thought I'd give my 2 cents about how I would change the sequel era.
You will join us or die. We got Death Star. 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 And you know that we got it. Death Star. And you know that we got it.
So to start, Papa Palpy, he's dead. I love him. I love Ian McDermott's portrayal. He's awesome, but bro's gotta stay dead. Otherwise, the entire original saga's invalidated. Now we get to the interesting stuff. What happens after an empire loses its emperor? Well, normally there'd be some kind of succession war over who gets the crown, be they biological heirs, powerful politicians, military leaders, whatever. And you'd probably end up with a similar thing that happened in China, with warlords feuding for dominance after Yuan Shikai proclaimed himself the Hongxian emperor, abdicated after 83 days, and died 3 months later. This is what happened in the original timeline after Palpy's essence/soul came back in a younger clone body/bodies for a bit, and we'll just ditch that clone shit and have either about 3 warlord factions or 1 unified remnant. They could each have their own quirks. One could be an atheist state who rejects the teachings of the Jedi and Sith alike and hunts them down with extreme prejudice. Another could go all dark side, try to resurrect the Sith Empire of old, or something similar with Sith legions and Sith teachings serving as a quasi-state religion. And then you have the Fell Empire from the old EU. A hereditary monarchy who rejects the dark side, exclusively relying on the light, with Imperial Knights and a Force-sensitive Emperor, plus no more bigotry against aliens, with some serving as officers and troopers. This would be a massive improvement from what Disney canon did with Palpy destroying planets that were loyal to him, taking all his loyalists to the unknown regions, and then not only building a bigger, more powerful Death Star, but also a bunch of Death Star destroyers. Somehow. I don't know. He knew console commands, I guess. The alliance to restore the Republic was disparate, with many different groups with different ideas of what to do post-victory. One such group was the Separatist Remnants. After the Empire toppled and the Republic reborn, it would make sense for those guys to stick around. This would be their one chance to secede from the Republic on day one without any need for war, and everyone would be so sick of fighting they'd probably just let them. This would allow you to show the differences between the Confederacy and the Republic in the movies. Maybe have a scene where someone on a planet in Republic space mentions how the Senate announced a new regulation or tax increase on power converters or something, and have a scene happening simultaneously where someone in Confederate space mentions how the planetary government has increased imports from another Confederate planet or decided to regulate a sector of the economy or something like that. You know, a Star Wars slice of life. That would be pretty cool. Compare this to Disney's New Republic, where the only remaining separatist gets treated as a joke, and what little of Republic we do see is presented as comically incompetent at best and another empire at worst. The latter could be an interesting direction to take, but they don't seem to do a whole lot with that idea. And the Republic gets wiped out in The Force Awakens anyway, which makes it even harder to give a shit. In the end, the addition of a third galactic power could make things more interesting, since now you have a revanchist Imperial Remnant and the fledgling New Republic and Confederacy of Independent Systems all licking their wounds, waiting for the other to make the first move. Combine this with various different independent planets, basically city-states by Star Wars standards, add for flavor, like a greater Gungan Empire or something. If you haven't already guessed, this would have some Cold War inspiration, with the conflict going hot later on, be it from one of the aforementioned factions or some foreign threat like the Yuuzhan Vong.
What a story, Mark.
Yeah, you can say that again.
Since it's the Cold War in space, and the Cold War was defined by mutually assured destruction, it only makes sense that superweapons come into the picture. Not just more Death Stars, get creative. Maybe a treaty, let's call it the Treaty of Alderaan, was signed, which explicitly forbid the creation of weapons powerful enough to blow up planets. Granted, there's no reason why a rogue faction couldn't develop them anyway in secret, but this could lead to secret research black sites developing all sorts of messed up sci-fi weapons, from super plagues to some kind of radiation weapon to boil seas and give everyone cancer to mind control and so on. But you can't just introduce super weapons and not use them. This is still Star Wars, meaning there should be a war at some point. Personally, I'd go for a proxy war to start. Think Afghanistan and Vietnam in space. Let's go with a greater Gungan Empire because that sounds fun and would upset prequel haters. Let's say that a warmongering expansionist boss with a chip on his shoulder about the way the Naboo viewed the Gungans takes over the ruling council. He then invades Naboo. Following his invasion, the Republic supports Naboo, with the Gungans getting Imperial backing. The Confederacy stays neutral. Eventually you start seeing more and more smaller conflicts kicking off. Planets and groups start taking sides, with things eventually spiraling into a messy hot war. In the background, a new alien threat starts gaining territory. Could be the Vong or something else, but let's stick with the Vong. This could lead to a Game of Thrones style situation, or rather what Game of Thrones ending should have been, where these three factions who hate each other are now forced to fight side by side against an existential threat. As for the Jedi, the Order would be started back up, but reformed so another Vader won't happen again. Luke would venture into the ancient texts and Apocrypha and create a new version of the Jedi without the extreme, almost suicidal devotion to asceticism. As the war ramps up, you could have parallels to the prequels with debates about whether the Order should take up arms again. This would lead to friction due to different Jedi having different origins and worldviews that will support different sides. You might even have some Jedi leave the Order to fight for one of the sides, which would lead to a potentially interesting story about two friends or lovers split apart by their loyalties in the war. Eventually, though, when the Vong come knocking, Luke and the rest of the Jedi get off their ass and fight to defend not just one individual faction, but sentient life itself. In case you don't know who the Yuuzhan Vong are, they were an extragalactic species who were almost wiped out by a race of sentient machines, which radicalized them against non-organic life and technology. This conflict led to them developing biological technology and a fanatic religion that rejects all non-organic tech and its users. They then went on a genocidal crusade against everyone in the galaxy and beyond, 40k style. I realize this is basically just Game of Thrones light in space, but at least it would be different and original for the Star Wars universe, instead of Disney doing what it did, i.e. hitting the reset button and making the previous trilogy pointless so you can sell X-Wing and TIE Fighters again. You can create a much more dynamic universe with much more storytelling potential that still allows you to cash in on nostalgia while introducing new things into the universe. Anyway, those are my ideas for the Star Wars sequel trilogy from a world-building perspective. Naturally, I didn't go into the character side because that's been talked about to death, and that's not really what interests me too much. Like, I don't really know how to write characters. I can tell if a character is well written or not, but I'm much more interested in the world building side. That's what got me into Star Wars lore and 40K and Star Trek and all this other stuff, you know?